Hello, welcome to the Liquid webinar on atomic swaps and Liquid. My name is Piscitello. I'm the Vice President of Product Management at Blockstream. So we're going to talk a little bit about atomic swaps and how they can really help benefit trading over the counter in using Bitcoin and Tether in this example. All right, so we're going to cover some of the basic use cases of the atomic swap, why you would want to do one, why it matters, what problems it's solving. And then we're going to go into a little bit more details about the structure of how the atomic swaps look inside of a Liquid versus in other environments. And then last, we're going to actually see one in place. So Daniel Williams and myself are going to conduct an atomic swap of Bitcoin and Tether. All right, so there's a couple of problems that exist in trading Bitcoin today. So traditionally, when you have peer-to-peer Bitcoin trading, there are risks and inefficiencies in place. So if I wanted to trade with someone Bitcoin, we might have counterparty risk. So this means that if I send funds first to the counterparty, they could take the funds and never actually pay or refuse to settle the trade if the market conditions change. So this is something that there is a risk that involves in there. We also have the possibility of costly middlemen. So one way around the idea of having counterparty risk is that you could involve a middleman that actually is mutually trusted by both parties, but generally this is going to slow things down and increase costs. So you may see this today. Some of the middlemen today is basically through either an exchange or through a trusted intermediary who's performing this role, or some type of escrow agent. Settlement is generally slower when you're settling assets in this way. So there are the ideas that you can do off-chain or you can do cross-chain atomic swaps that are possible between different chains. But in this case, you have to do a lot of work to set up these channels ahead of time. And you may end up with conditions that require you to wait a long time to actually recover your money if the trade does not happen. And also, you may have limited liquidity in this process because you don't necessarily have, you can only trade with people that you trust and have relationships with. So you may have to end up getting a worse price on your trade because you can't deal with people that you don't fully trust. So atomic swaps really help solve a lot of these problems. And so there's really a couple of main use cases that we really have for atomic swaps. The first one is just for the pure over-the-counter market. So if you have two people that are trading with each other, they already have a way to contact each other. They want to actually engage in that trade, but they don't have a strong relationship or any type of contractual obligation to trade with each other. So this makes it a really nice use case because I don't really have to know anything other than anything I'd have to know for compliance about this person. I don't have to know whether they're trustworthy or not because I'm either going to have the trade execute and get the funds, or I won't have anything happen at all. So the next one is more of interbroker trades. So in this case, you can have brokers that deal with customers. And in this case, there's kind of two ways. You could have either like a large investor type customer where the broker is providing a service of sourcing a large amount of coins, or more of a retail broker. So we've seen kind of both avenues really start to grow a lot in Bitcoin. In either case, they need to source coins from somewhere, and they may not necessarily have a customer that they can directly match with. So in this case, a broker can work with another broker that might have a counterparty in mind, and they can actually conduct the swap between each other and then service their customers. Without a broker, you can also do just pure peer-to-peer. Any individual trader could post a message somewhere. I saw some even happening on the Blockstream satellite where you could post an order and anyone can go and match that trade. So you don't have to actually make any risk of the party not delivering their end of the bargain or even necessarily knowing who it is. And then the last use case, which is a more advanced use case, is the idea that you could have a non-custodial exchange. So exchanges today have to hold funds in order to let you make orders on the order books. And in this case, it actually is possible with Liquid to set up signed transactions that are with funds you hold yourself that are sent to exchanges, and any exchange that supports this type of environment could match them with other customers who then countersign them, and we now have the matchmaking process being done by an exchange, but the parties never have to actually deposit their funds, and they actually never even have to leave cold storage in this case. So that's something that's very exciting and possible with Liquid. All right, so we're going to dig in a little bit more about atomic swaps and how they actually work. So the first thing we're going to look at is, the use case. What are we trying to do? What does it actually mean to be an atomic swap? And in this case, we have Alice, who has Tether, and we have Bob that has liquid Bitcoin. And we want to make sure that Alice and Bob are able to switch those assets without any type of chance for either party to get both of the assets without living up to their end of the bargain. So atomic swaps basically can make it so that these things swap places or that they don't happen at all. So this limits counterparty risk and also can increase the speed of settlement. All right, so we're going to look inside of a transaction that actually has an atomic swap, and we'll look at more detail at the one that we create with Daniel soon, but this is going to give you an overview of what it looks like. So Liquid is very much like Bitcoin. You have the idea of inputs, those are on the left, and you have outputs. The owner of the inputs will sign those inputs, and by signing them, they can dictate where they will go as a destination. So in this case, it's a little bit complicated here. There's a lot of lines, but let me try to break it down for you a little bit. So in this case, Alice has Tether and Bob has Bitcoin, and they want to swap some of that. Now Alice wants to have some of that Tether come back to her as change, and some of it go to Bob. And Bob has some of that liquid Bitcoin, wants to go to Alice, some to go to himself, and some to pay a fee to get onto the Liquid network. So we're gonna walk through what we have in what's called the Liquid Swap tool and show how that this transaction can be constructed interactively. All right, so this is exactly what we're going to do with the tool. And so the first thing is Alice has some Tether. Let's just say she has 10,000 Tether, and she wants to trade for half of a Bitcoin. In this case, she would have to give herself back the change. Let's say she settled on a price of $10,000 per Bitcoin. In that case, she would want to send herself back 5,000 Tether and get herself 0.5 Bitcoin. Now, in this case, the transaction is not valid because we don't know, the inputs and outputs don't add up. Her Tether is greater than the amount she's getting, and the Bitcoin is coming out of thin air right now. But she can take this transaction that's partially constructed and now give it to Bob. Later, Bob can take this transaction and he can attach his Bitcoin to it. So when he attaches his Bitcoin, he can actually direct it to go matching that amount that Alice is asking for, give himself some change if there's any left over, and then have the last bits go into a fee. And this pays for the transaction to get included in a block in Bitcoin. He is then able to sign that input because he knows all of the locations that it's going to go, so he can sign it. It's still not quite a valid transaction yet because Alice hasn't agreed to it by signing it yet. So after the trade has been accepted by Bob, he can pass it back to Alice, who can then complete the trade. She does this by signing the transaction, which sends some of the Tether to herself, some to Bob, and the transaction is now valid and can be broadcast to the network. So we can compare this to kind of a couple of different ways that we could swap things. And there's a lot of different options out there in different blockchains. And so one of them is the idea that you could have just purely in Liquid with a single transaction atomic swap like I just showed. The other one is the idea of a cross-chain atomic swap. For those of you unfamiliar with cross-chain atomic swaps, you can do this with different blockchains, and you can actually encumber the assets such that it can only be spent by both parties or by the original owner after a long timeout period. And then the last option is the idea of a smart contract style atomic swap. And this is something where you write a smart contract in any type of blockchain that supports that, and it has the full conditions for what it takes, and by sending something in, it's all written in the smart contract. So really, there's a couple of advantages here. So if you have the cooperative time to settle in this case, you really have 2 minutes. It's a matter of setting it up and ready to go. In the cross-chain swap case, this can take upward of an hour because you need to set up channels ahead of time to make sure that these are actually available. And then on the smart contract, you actually need to set up and build a smart contract and wait for settlement on the chain for all the assets to be deposited in the smart contract to do this. Then on the last side, there's also what's called the non-cooperative case. So in the other two cases, you send your funds to this. Basically, you can think of it as an escrow, either a smart contract escrow or a 2 of 2 signature escrow. And those, if the other party does not allow you to escape the funds, you could wait up to a day or however long you set this up. On the non-cooperative case in Liquid, it really only takes 2 minutes because all you have to do is just spend the funds yourself, and you have sole custody of them the whole time. Fees are much lower on the Liquid side. On the cross-chain swap, you need to set up transactions and have transactions to actually close it and clear it. And on the smart contract, it could be more, somewhere in the mix. If you can reuse a contract or not, the fees would be probably higher just to get that in there, but maybe not quite as high as a full cross-chain atomic swap. Complexity, it's very low on the Liquid side. It's just a matter of creating this one transaction, and privacy is very high. And as you'll see when we do this, the only people who are aware of what's going on in this transaction are the participants in the transaction. The complexity on the cross-chain side is medium-high. You have to set up multiple sets of transactions to get this to work, and the privacy is a little bit apparent. You don't necessarily know it's an atomic swap or know the corresponding transaction, but all the amounts are visible and everyone can see what's going on. And on the smart contract side, everything's very visible and very complex. So you have this, if there's any type of error or bug in the smart contract, you may have to wait on that. All right, we're going to jump next into the tool, but I see there's a couple questions that have popped up in here. So the first one is, can Alice start the transaction without having L-BTC? How can she broadcast the desired transaction? And then actually in this question, the answer to the question is yes, she can do that. There just needs to be one person who has inputs that have liquid Bitcoin. So it just needs one person to be able to contribute that to swap. And the swap of two assets might not even involve Bitcoin, but in that case, you would still want to have Bitcoin available for the fee. So an example of that, let's just say you had liquid Tether and you had also, let's just say, a JPY token. In that case, you could swap the JPY token for the Tether and basically do a Forex market, but you'd still need to have the liquid Bitcoin to pay the fee. And the last question is Tether on Liquid? Yes, it is. So this was launched fairly recently by Bitfinex. So you can go and convert any Tether that you have on Bitfinex to the Liquid blockchain and withdraw that as well. So we're going to actually use this example with real live Tether, and it is the asset that is recognized and available on various markets. And the next question is there any documentation you recommended for atomic swaps? So yeah, I'll walk you through the swap tool that will be able to do a lot of this. And I think that answers the questions for now. So we'll jump right back in to actually using the swap tool. And so this is going to be very interactive here, and we'll walk through. I'm just going to talk through what it is going to do, and then I'm going to actually go through and do a swap with Daniel here. All right, so we have the Liquid Swap tool. This is a tool that we created that works it has both a GUI and a command line interface. And this tool is able to interface with any Elements Core node. So Elements Core is the software that is able to connect to the Liquid network and allows you to have a wallet and view transactions and send transactions through a GUI. So this is basically your full node for Liquid. And so once you have that set up, you can go download the Liquid Swap tool from the Blockstream GitHub page, and you can start making these swaps. And this is what it's going to look like here. It's going to follow that process very similar to what we had before. All right, so to get started, just to go over the requirements, you will need Elements Core 0.17.0.1. It's the latest release. You will want the Liquid Swap tool, and that's available on our GitHub. We can post links to all of this. Daniel, if you can get a chance in the chat, that would be a great way to add those links in there. And then you just need to enable the RPC setup so that they can communicate with the Elements Core node, and then you can actually select an asset to swap. And you must have L-BTC to cover fees. Now, the question asked earlier is, how can Alice transact without L-BTC? In the case of the swap tool, we do require it from both parties. And this is just to make sure that each party is not adding disproportionate amount of fees by having very complex inputs and making the other party pay for the fee. Also, because there is no requirement that any asset has to be liquid. Also, we strongly recommend having your assets labeled. This is something that can be do in the configuration file. And you can actually take the labels that are in our asset registry. And there's a Python tool we can get published out there for you to take a look at, and we'll actually pull all the asset labels. So you have everything that's available that is labeled in green, labeled the same way in this tool. All right, so just going to walk you through the process real quick. You'll see it very soon interactively. So the first thing is you're going to want to select the asset and the amount of what you plan to send. Then the second thing is selecting what asset you plan to receive. If you don't have it already or have it in your asset directory in your configuration file, you can also click Add New Asset, and as long as you have the ID of the asset, you can add it in here, and it shows up. I select the amount of what I want to have here. So in this case, I'm trading 1,000th of a Bitcoin for 10.4 Tether. Fortunately, that's a pretty accurate price given that I wrote these slides a couple of days ago. When you do that, you'll create what's called a proposal, and that proposal will be sent to your trading partner. So then I can send that proposal to the trading partner, and they can load it into their swap tool, and it will show them exactly the opposite. In this case, you will receive 1,000th of a Bitcoin, and you will be required to send 10.4 Tether. The person who is accepting it can accept that proposal and save that file and send it back to their trading partner. All right, the last thing in here is to finalize the swap. So we go back to the original person who created the proposal, and now they basically need to sign that swap. So they can see, just verify it is what they expected it to be. They click Execute Swap, and it gets broadcast immediately to the blockchain. And within 2 minutes, you have settlement of the swap. So let's go in. We're going to actually do, and then you can examine that it's actually here in inside of Blockstream.info. So you can see the full transaction here. All of the amounts are listed as confidential. No one can see what they are. The only thing we see is this fee that's coming in here. So I mentioned, there's a Tether input, there's a Bitcoin input from Alice, and there's a Bitcoin input from Bob, and then there's a change input of Bitcoin and Tether, and there's a Bitcoin and Tether from the second party as well, and maybe another different Bitcoin change from the second party that wasn't actually that was sending the Tether. So we don't know actually which input or output is which. And that's really what's nice is I can trade. This could be 1,000,000 Bitcoins. This could be 100 Bitcoin. This could be 1 Bitcoin. This could be 1,000th of a Bitcoin. No one has any idea what's going on in this transaction. So, all right, getting a lot of questions about the actual process. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to share my screen. Just 1 second. I am going to change my resolution so this will look real nice here. All right, hopefully everyone can see my screen here. Daniel's going to be working with me on this one. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start the swap. I started the asset swap tool. It already knows how to find the node out of the box. If I had any custom configurations here, I could actually change this as well. All right. So yeah, as I mentioned, you can change the authentication. Maybe you have a custom setup for your node, but it is going to work with elements out of the box by default. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to set 0.001 Bitcoin. I want to receive Tether. So Daniel, what's the latest price of Bitcoin? Do you have it up?
Bear with me. Let's see. 10,
I don't want to get ripped off here.
So it's 10,341. Yep.
All right. It says 10.34 Tether work for you. We'll trade at that rate. I'm going to generate this proposal. The proposal here is text. It is encoded to explain what it is, but you can also export it here to file here. So I'm going to export this proposal to text. All right. Now I'm going to send that over to Daniel here real quick. We're just going to message that in. Let me know when you got it, Daniel. I just sent it over to you.
Okay, got it.
All right, he's going to share his screen here.
Okay. Hey, everyone. This is Daniel. So I think you should be able to see my screen now. So what I'm going to do is take the proposal Alan sent me and input that into my swap tool.
So he's got it.
Okay, so now I'm going to import it. Bear with me. Okay, so now I can inspect it. So I'm going to receive 1/1000th of a Bitcoin and send 10.4 Tether. And so now I can accept this proposal. And now it'll prompt me about the transaction fees and display the receiving address. So I can click yes there. And so now I can export this. And send it back to Alan. 1 second. Okay, I just sent it back to Alan.
All right, I've just downloaded it here. Let me share my screen. All right, so I'm going to continue the swap. I'm going to import. And I can see here that it's a thousandth of a Bitcoin and 10.4. That doesn't seem right, Daniel. That's the, I think I've got the wrong one here. Let me start over. This is the one from just earlier.
Oh, I may have I may have sent you the swap from the other day, actually.
All right, go ahead and send that one back. Let me stop sharing here. And
okay, bear with me.
Sure. I just want to make sure it's going to work, because if it's something we already spent, it's going to. All right, I sent it to you again. Sorry about that.
Okay, this is the correct one. Okay, I sent it over.
All right, and I'm getting it just now. Ah, much better. Except for me, I'm getting less tether. I should have just gone with the other one. So I'm still sending him the thousandth of a Bitcoin, and I'm receiving the 10.34 tether. So I'll execute the swap. I do have to pay the fee for my inputs. And there we go. There's the transaction ID. So I'm actually going to do, so I'm going to copy that. And we're going to go to blockstream.info. And you can see it's unconfirmed right now. And as you can see, looking at this transaction, I really don't know much about it. I can go into the details here. I don't know what asset it is. I don't know the amount of it. All the information about this is completely hidden from the public view. But if you remember, going back from what it is, I have, because I sent Tether, or no, I sent Bitcoin. So one of these inputs is mine, and two of them are Daniel's. One is Tether, one is Bitcoin. I am getting back some Bitcoin as change. I'm getting back some Tether as change. And he's getting back some Bitcoin as change, Tether as change, and some Bitcoin that is being sent by me. So that explains what all of the outputs are for. Again, we don't know the order or input. We don't know whose is whose. It obscures quite a lot of detail from here. But everyone's validating that this is actually correct. And in the event I ever needed to share this information with any kind of auditor or regulator, I could actually provide them a key that they could actually decrypt all of this information and figure out the parts that are relevant to myself. So I'm going to stop sharing here. I'm going to jump back to the slides. I think that might be it, though. Let me jump back to see if there's any. That was the last slide. So yeah, we can look in here. Let me see if I can open up where the chat is. I see it's popping up. All right, quite a lot of questions in here. All right, is there an API to the tool so that I can use to build my own tool? Yes, so it does have a command line interface. It's all open source as well, so you could take bits and pieces out if you wanted to go from scratch on that. So that's completely available. Next question is, when you mentioned that the transaction is confidential, is that because you used elements in order to hide the amount broadcast onto the network? Yes, so liquid transactions by default use confidential transactions. So this means that the amount and the asset type will be hidden by default. And let me see if there's any other questions or chat popping up in here. I'll give everyone just about one more minute just to pop up any other questions they have about this. But the swap tool is available. So if you go to GitHub, Blockstream's GitHub, there's something, the project there is called Liquid Swap Tool. And then if you want to get the elements repository, you actually want to, at that point, go to Elements project and then Elements, and that will run, if you use the binaries there or build it, it will run Liquid by default, or you can run it in what's called Elements Reg Test mode. So that concludes the atomic swap presentation. Just going to do one last sweep on questions. I do not see any. So if you have any other questions, feel free to email us, liquid@blockstream.com. We'll be happy to answer any questions you have. And this presentation will be published on YouTube shortly as well, if you'd like to go back and share it with others. Appreciate coming out to take a look. Thanks.